So this is what I would like to do. I would like to give some reflection, and I think this will be helpful because as the field, we need to look back and look at what the potential is, right? So by the past, I mean, what are the key developments and what are the core problems of research and IT and tourism or e-tourism? And for me, I see clearly there's some stages or phases of development. I also want to kind of share with everyone the areas of potential kind of the problems, right, in the future. I want to relate you, refer you actually to the big story in 2019. Probably many of you have heard about it, the bankruptcy of Thomas Cook. For your information, if you are not aware of Thomas Cook was one of the kind of the oldest and one of the most prominent, right, global tourism travel agency actually on the global stage. So the name of Thomas Cook actually was taken from the person who was known for starting the modern mass tourism, right? When he organized group trips to England actually to see rugby matches in the 19th century. And from there, this was the beginning of the modern travel agencies. And also it has something to do with Brexit. Right, because of that, I think there's problems in terms of the travels between those borders, right, and the agreements between countries. So that kind of created problems. But more fundamentally, I think it had a lot to do with technology, right? Thomas Cook was not, in many years, in decades actually, was way behind the development of technology because he didn't. They knew. But the business model actually, the way it was set up was not adaptive, right? So they failed to adapt to the environment. And a big part of that was because of technology. So they failed, they went out of business. This is the big news in 2019. So question is how do we look at the development of technology and say, hey, this is what happened, right? As scholars, what we do is to conceptualize things, right? To put a label, to put a name on it, and put the kind of the structure to describe what happens in the reality, right? This is what we do, right? But it's more about intellectual development than, say, telling you how to run a business. We don't do that. If you ask me how to run a business, I have no idea. Actually, I don't care, right? What we care is about knowledge. How do we develop the knowledge that best reflects the reality, right? And also, points us to the right direction. If we can do that, then it's worthwhile. Okay, so this is how I see, research in our field is about. Talk about it, how I think what would happen, and maybe that would be helpful for you to think about the future. So that's how I see, but then what would be the kind of a general framework I apply to look at these so-called the stages of development? I say, well, there are several kind of the components, right, by which we can examine what happened during these phases. I say, well, there are 6 of them. One is that the first one is technological conditions. What is going on in the technical world? The second one is the society's reaction to it. So it's a social kind of aspect of technology. The third one is, from the research point of view, what are the basic needs and problems? What drives research, right? This is what we're talking about, knowledge creation. And of course, if there are problems and needs, research needs, then we can ask the question: what are the dominant paradigms, right? Dr. Khu mentioned paradigm, right? Paradigm is kind of the way of looking at things, right? And perspectives and disciplines. What are the knowledge that we use to examine things, to study things, and theories and concepts, right? Theoretical foundations and conceptual foundation. And what comes out of this kind of research? So number 6 is, okay, if based on this, what is the role of technology and its implications? Okay, for these different stages. So what happened in the first stage, right, in the so-called era of digitization, I would say, well, of course, it's the internet, it's www. It's nothing new. We don't care about it anymore. And there's a LAN LAN is kind of local area network, right? It's kind of limited internet with the scope, with the local scope. I'm sure many of you probably haven't heard of the Netscape and IE, right? Netscape was the very first kind of the generation of internet browser. It's not the very first, I think it's the very first generation of commercialized, right? It was on the market, but before that, the prototype of internet browser was called Mosaic, right?
Yeah.
It was invented by an undergraduate student who studied at Illinois, right? He was a computer science undergrad student. He created a browser and he went to the business, went to the industry. And I think at some point he was the president, the chairman of Netscape, and Mark Andreessen, right? Yes, that's his name. Yeah. IE was developed, Internet Explorer was developed by Microsoft, right? And email, desktop, laptop, mobile. So this is the technology we use, like we started, using 20 years ago. Mm-hmm. We still use some of them, right? But they have changed quite a bit, right? The way we look at the www has changed quite a bit, right? At some point we say there is a Web 2.0. Now people are talking about Web 4.0, 5.0, right? So there is an evolution of these technological foundations. So society's reaction, and earlier we said, well, it's amazing, right? Back then, the thing called the internet was amazing, and the companies, and including both private for-profit and not for-profit sectors were starting to using the internet to do businesses, right? But essentially, only parts of the society have adopted the internet back. And we have numbers, we have statistics on that. And the big deal is, businesses. I'm using the term business in a very loose term. By business, I mean everyone, right? With the purpose of doing online businesses. The big drive for doing that is transition from offline to online. We want to convert everything we do, the information about that product, from the offline mode to online mode. So there are all kinds of problems associated with that. At the individual level, there's a lot of problems as well. Like I would call probably one of the most important issues with that is the so-called the cognitive dissonance and behavior challenges, right? We don't know how to use the internet because we were used to reading books, reading magazines, watching TV, right? The big challenge back then, many of the research problems were because of the individuals, there's some behavior challenges, okay? And that's why we care about how we design a website, right? Because nowadays, we don't do research-related website design anymore because it's kind of old school. There's a reason for that. Well, because the society, has moved away from that, right? Everyone is so used to, navigating on the internet, right? It's not the problem anymore. So what were the research needs and dominant problems back then? It's really, for our field, is really about marketing. Right? What drove research back then was how we can use the internet to represent tourism. So what are the so-called the basic paradigms and perspectives? I came from the kind of the background of the business school, and Chormo and someone, they all have this kind of the business school kind of backgrounds, right? In the business school setting, it's about value chain, right? How money will be made, and because of that, you have to make sure there's a value created, right? So there's a lot of, looking at how things are done, what are the process, look like, and of course, if the problem is marketing driven, then there's a classic literature on the so-called the experience economy, right? The book written by Pine and Gilmore in 1999. This is the kind of the one of the so-called the Bibles, if you want, for tourism marketing. Really important. And I would argue also the notion of the long tail, right? Because of the digitization, it creates the new structure for the market. So the so-called the long tail is that, is that there's a 20-80 rules, right? There's the top 20 of the products on the market that will generate 80% of the revenue, and the rest actually would generate 20, right? But the argument for them, Anderson, the author, was, well, digitization changed that, right? After everything is digitized, actually, it kind of creates the kind of the different structure, and the long tail of the product distribution actually can create value because of digitization. So this is what the argument looks like. Disciplines, I'm sure, we all came from different backgrounds, but I'm sure you probably would agree with me, and we learned a lot from, computer engineering, especially in the field of human-computer interaction, right? MIS, Management Information Systems. Actually, these are like, especially MIS, they're not I would argue that it's not the discipline, right? Because the MIS people also borrow ideas and theories from other, more established disciplines like consumer behavior, cognitive psychology, right? Those fields. And of course, consumer behavior is the important field that informs our research on e-tourism. And business, business schools, marketing, and social sciences. Lots of research were driven by, say, social psychology. Recently, there's lots of research, for example, from network standpoint of geography, right? Professor Park's research has a lot to do with geography, understanding, mobility, movement, patterns, right? That's kind of the macro level of understanding, right? Travel and tourism. So what is the role of technology? The picture I'm showing here is something I borrowed from Skift. It's Skift. So we see technology as the role, as the medium, as the tool, as the object. To a great degree, we see, it's driven by the needs for tourism marketing. And there's a kind of the theoretical argument. This is more from, say, Dan Fessenmeyer, because the way he sees technology as, well, at the beginning, it's about usability, functionality, making sure the technology can work, right? To later, it's about communications and persuasion, right? How we can use technology in a better way so it's more persuasive. It serves the purpose of communication. But then later on, we look at technology as intelligent agent, right? Technology now all of a sudden has become smart, right? This is what Professor Khu would use most of the time. It's called the smart technology. So next stage, I would say it's called acceleration. There's a reason for it. I borrowed this term from Thomas Friedman. I say, well, if you look at the technological conditions, in the second stage, it's basically, it started with the iPhone, right? Or AI and robots. So this is a very different kind of landscape of technology, right? You can look at it in many ways, but I would say we're living in a very different world now compared to 20 years ago, right? So what is the social kind of the aspects of technology? Adoption is universal, even though digital divides still exist, right? But now I think we look at digital device in different ways, right? Not just in terms of access to the internet. It seems that people have, everyone has access to the internet now, but we use internet in different ways, right? If you look at the general election, right, in the U.S. driven, we now realized actually technology plays the big part in it because, you know, for example, the Trump supporters, they were to a great extent influenced by social media, right? Social media is driving everyone crazy and creates digital divide. So we look at, you know, what are the research needs and problems. You know, I said in the beginning, the first phase is about tourism marketing and management, but it seems that, you know, we are more focused on development. The dominant paradigm within this era is, you know, there are different kinds of, it's more social science, scientific kind of way of looking at technology. For example, Turkle, and she writes about life on the screen, right? How the internet, everyone is hiding behind the computer screen. And of course, that changes our behavior. That changes the way we talk to each other. The computer science / social science people like Laser et al., they publish in the science magazine, and they came up with the notion called life in the network. Again, this is part of the article we published in 2015 in electronic markets. I think it's a nice kind of way to summarize the difference between e-tourism and smart tourism, right? There's different aspects. For example, in terms of sphere. Sphere is kind of the abstract way of looking at, I would say, the scope, right? It's more about the scope. In e-tourism, we focus on the digital, right? The website, those things. But now in smart tourism, we're more focused on the bridges, right? Between digital and physical. Now there's a lots of things, actually, technology are now being embedded in the physical environment. Sensors, Internet of Things. Core technologies, website, in old school, right, old days. Now it's sensors, smartphones, and others. Particularly related to travel, it's in e-tourism, we're focused on marketing, right? It's about pre and post, but now it's more about during. How we can create the experiences, how we can support and create the innovative kind of business models to support, you know, the experiences at the destination. This is the key question we develop. This is about being smart. I will make it short now. And there's lots of so-called the promises and uncertainties looking ahead of us, right? Today, actually, I was attending in the morning before I went to the advisory board meeting. I was attending online. It's a free seminar organized by MIT on social media. Mm-hmm. And they invited a bunch of really famous people, really famous people, like a host of the CBS kind of a program, CNN anchor, and, you know, authors publishing, you know, about social media. So it's really good seminar, and it's the day long, right? So they have different sessions from the morning until I couldn't finish. I was sitting in a couple of the, you know, morning sessions, and was fantastic. So they talk about social media, and still, even after, say, social media, this is like 10 years, more than maybe 15 years after we came up with the notion of social media, we still struggle with how we deal with, how we understand it, right? Because it's such a incredibly complex kind of phenomena that is changing every fabric of the society. It changes the way we do business. It changes the way we talk to each other. it changes the way it pushes people around, right? Even though you're not conscious of it, you don't know you are being pushed by technology, right? So there's the discussions on openness, the discussions on transparency, and AI also plays the big role behind social media, right? We know that. If you log on to, Facebook, much of the advertising and promotional stuff is driven by AI, no doubt about it. Okay, so I would argue, that the new conditions of technology kind of becomes ubiquitous. Professor Khu used the term ubiquitous earlier, but also I would like to say it becomes amorphous. Amorphous means that without a form, without a shape, right? But we know that technology is behind many of the things we interact with on the internet, off the internet, right? It's not a computer anymore, right? If you log on to, say, a website like Facebook, Amazon, there's all kinds of programs sitting behind the screen that are trying to get you, right? Of course, the continuous growth of AI, technology is becoming smarter, but more scary, right? Because this is not really transparent. There's a great promise to support travel and enhance experiences. And many of you probably, especially the young people, young students, you have more experience than us in terms of interacting with smart technologies. Society's reaction to technology is becoming more wary. By wary, I mean more cautious, right? Because of the realization of the potential damages technology, especially AI and social media, can do to the society. So there's new research needs, right?
Yeah.
How we define a tourist? What do you mean by travel and tourism? What's the experience, right? Many people now can sit in their home and experience the place, not necessarily the exactly same, but we get the same maybe experience, right? In terms of the excitement, in terms of the novelty, in terms of adventurous, for example, right? You don't have to travel anymore. So how can we use technology to create new things, innovation? Smart technology, I think smart tourism is part of the strategies, right? It's not completely the whole thing, but it offers the framework that allows us to discuss innovation, creativity, and design. So I see great future. This is why I said at the beginning, I see great promise in terms of, using smart tourism to define. So anyways, to summarize, so we need to critically look at technology. And this is my favorite quote. It's by a Pulitzer Prize winner and E.O. Wilson. He's a biologist, and this is his famous kind of a quote. The real problem of humanity is the following. We have the Paleolithic emotions, medieval institutions, and godlike technology. Our emotions are still quite biological, right? We are the product of evolution. I think many of the emotions we have are still tied to our ancestors who survived in the wilderness, right? We still had that kind of, because the simple example, the way we like sweet food and fatty food, right? Because this is a biological, but at the emotional level, we still have the traces of our ancestors. And our institutions are still quite, pretty much inherited from hundreds of years ago. Like the notion of camp nations, those things, institutions, systems, right? Borders, right? Those are old ideas. But technology is developing so fast. Technology doesn't care about boundaries, right? Technology doesn't care about where you are, right? Right? Doesn't matter. So we're way behind, really. So like the picture I'm showing here, because of COVID, right? This is the picture taken at the I'm sure many of you heard about Costco, right? Costco store, people started buying toilet paper, right? At some point because of COVID. This is the emotional response to COVID. It's not rational, but we are like that, right? So technology should help us to do better things instead of doing stupid things, right? So this is kind of, so really we need to think about how we can use technology to support, sustainability, well-being, prosperity of the society, right? We should not look at technology in a very, very narrow kind of the sense, okay? So that's what I mean by smart. We should be smart, okay? So some ideas actually we developed, as part of the paper we wrote with Professor Fesmeyer. We say, well, because of this is the general framework about smart tourism, how it's connected to destination, smart destination, right? There's different layers. For example, the social psychological layer, the tools layer, and also the stakeholders layer, right? So there's a wrappers of different things that surround the individual travelers. So I would argue, research should kind of transforms from consumerism that is focused on selling, marketing, right, to a value-driven agenda. We should focus on value, right? For example, in many places, it's about using technology to measure, to control, to over tourism, right? Technology can also be used to support, develop responsible tourism, sustainability, well-being. I mentioned, for us, especially in response to COVID, is about resilience, right? And to find new ways of doing things. I was reading an article from New York Times yesterday, actually, after COVID, in response to COVID, actually the tech industry actually has developed a bunch of technologies for the restaurants industry in New York City. And that's how technology should be used to support travel, hospitality, and tourism. So with that, this is what I mean by, I don't think this is new anymore, right? For example, Airbnb started because of COVID, started, developing all these online experiences, digital experiences. They started selling early last year, but I don't know how successful they were, but probably not so successful, right? Oh. But people actually are trying, businesses are trying to develop different things in response to COVID. Okay, so being smart is about ideas. So here's something I would like to kind of promote.